After nearly a decade of optimism and prosperity, the United States was thrown into despair on Black Tuesday, October 29, 1929, the day the stock market crashed and the official beginning of the Great Depression. As stock prices plummeted with no hope to recovery, panic struck. Masses and masses of people tried to sell their stock, buying. The stock market, which had appeared to be the surest way to become rich, quickly became the path to bankruptcy. On June 25, 1938, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the Fair Labor Standards Act, also known as the Wage and Hour Bill. After election changes over a two-year period, 1936 and 1938, and Congress changing the bill many times over a period of 1 year before deciding on passing the bill. The act only applied to certain industries with a certain labor force. The act also stopped child labor and set minimum wage and maximum work week hours, 25 cents a day at 44 hours per week. The Great Depression was during this era when President Roosevelt was trying to get better labor laws for everyone, not just women and children. Roosevelt had Congress and the Supreme Court against him. When Roosevelt introduced the New Deal in 1933, which would help out the U.S. economy and limit and enforce fair trade, Americans was hopeful. People agreed to 40-hour work weeks and no more than $15 a week. They also promised not to hire children under the age of 16 or younger. U.S. citizens were to buy only American products with the Blue Eagle logo over the business door. On May 27, 1935, the Supreme Court, all 9 judges, decided that the new labor laws was unconstitutional due to how chickens were killed and sold to kosher retailers. This day is now referred to as Black Monday. The Supreme Court went on to find that state and federal laws were unconstitutional too in 1936. After this, Roosevelt decided to take action and tell the justices that he could replace them as they come up on retiring age. On March 29, 1937, the Supreme Court decided in a 5-4 vote in favor of Elsie Parrish, who sued West Coast Hotel Company for $216.19 in back pay. This was a victory for Roosevelt, and so known this day is named White Monday. The Public Contracts Act of 1936 was acting that required government contractors to have an 8-hour day and a 4-hour work week, to employ only boys over 16 years old and girls 18 years old. They had to pay a prevailing minimum wage, which would be set by the Secretary of Labor. The bill, which was rewritten, was passed by Congress on June 30, 1936. May 24, 1937, President Roosevelt sent the bill to Congress, but as time passed, it was amended and passed by the Senate on July 31, 1937. The bill finally was passed and signed and enacted into law with 72 amendments. The law took effect on October 24, 1938. The Fair Labor Standards Act offers coverage to workers not necessarily based on a particular definition of employer. The Act covers both individual and enterprises with 2 or more employees that make a certain amount of money in a year. These can include public and private businesses, companies, and corporations. Since 1938, there has been several amendments added to the Fair Labor Standards Act for the good of the American economy and for equal treatment of people that have been unfairly not given jobs, low pay, and discriminated against due to race. The Equal Pay Act of 1963 was passed to amend the Fair Labor Standards Act and make it illegal to pay workers lower wages strictly on the basis of sex. It is often summarized as equal pay for equal work. Fair Labor Standards Act minimum wage poster was amended in July 2007 that makes every employer responsible for posting the minimum wage poster at all times. Amended on July 24, 2009, the new minimum wage for persons over the age of 20 without any disabilities is $7.25. For persons under the age of 20, the minimum wage is $4.25. And after 90 consecutive days, or when the person turns 20, they must receive $7.25. The 1930s were called the Dirty 30s because of the Dust Bowls that swept the country. Despite the Depression and the Dust Bowls, the decade saw a proliferation in new technologies, including the intercontinental aviation and radio. President Roosevelt gave his first fireside speech across the radio waves. Swing music starts becoming popular from 1935 onward. It gradually replaces a sweet form of jazz that had been popular for the first half of the decade. Delta blues music, first recorded in the late 1920s, was expanded by Robert Johnson and Skip James, two of the most important and influential acts of the blues genre. Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was released in 1937. In 1939, The Little Princess and the Wizard of Oz was released. The world's tallest building for the next 35 years was constructed, opening as the Empire State Building on May 3, 1931 in New York City. Great entertainers of the decade include Julie Garland as Dorothy Gale in Wizard of Oz and Clark Gable as Rhett Butler in the trailer for Gone with the Wind, 1939. Musicians of the 30s include Bing Crosby, Benny Goodman, and Frank Sinatra. At the end of the Great Depression, World War II outbroke on December 1, 1939. Around the world, other wars were also happening. The Colombia-Peru War, the Chaco War, and the Second Japanese War.